Player agency. In the YouTube space for tabletop role-playing games, that is the current buzzword going around everywhere. Everyone's advice is to say yes and to ensure that players are the central characters of the story and that their story is what's going to be driving the campaign. But what happens when the GM's agency just gets erased in the process? Have you ever sat behind the screen feeling less like a storyteller and more like a video game engine? Well, let's talk about that. And as we do, I want to make sure this is clear that we are not trying to steal the spotlight from your players. We want to make sure that you are remembering that the GM is a player too, and when your fun is gone, the game is on a fast track to ruin. So let's start by breaking down the problem, look at why it's causing a quiet crisis of GM burnout, and most importantly, give you real, actual steps you can take to protect your creative fire and run a campaign that's healthier, more creative, and just more fun for everyone, including yourself. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You spend weeks, maybe months, crafting a world. You build out factions with their own goals. You design villains with motivations that make sense. And you create a core conflict that you are genuinely hyped to see your players tackle. Session 1 kicks off. The players listen to your fantastic adventure hook, and then they turn around 180 degrees and announce that they want to start a bakery. The whole table has a good laugh, and all eyes turn to you. The expectation is crystal clear. You need to ditch everything you prepped and, right now, spin up an entire campaign about the competitive flower market on the Sword Coast. Now that may have been a little over the top, but I feel like a lot of GMs have run into similar situations. Situations where the players have their own game that they want to play and it's not the game the GM had prepped or had offered to the players in the first place. Some people would say, oh yes, this is a quintessential area of player agency. But for the GM, it can feel like a creative gut punch. And that's the heart of the issue. We've started confusing player agency with turning the game master into a servant. A content machine who's just expected to react and generate fun on demand with zero regard for their creative investment. That pressure is enormous, and it's a one-way ticket to GM burnout, which is real and a serious threat to the health of this hobby. And then this is where the frustration begins to boil over. That feeling that you're not a collaborative storyteller, but a reactive computer program. It's the slow burn disappointment of seeing plot lines you were passionate about tossed aside without a thought. It's the exhaustion that comes from constant improvisation, not as a fun challenge, but as a desperate scramble to keep up. It's that unfair weight of expectation that you should have a plan for every bizarre choice the players can make. And sometimes published adventures make it even worse. They can be rigid with box text telling you exactly what to say and NPCs whose actions are scripted to happen no matter what. This can make you feel like you're not allowed to react to your players' clever ideas, turning you into a passive script reader. The message, whether it's intended or not, is that your job is just to run the program, not to have any agency of your own. This isn't just frustrating, it's completely unsustainable. When the GM stops being a creative partner and becomes a service provider, their passion wanes, the game deteriorates, and sooner or later, the entire campaign fizzles out. To fix this, we have to start with our words. The problem isn't player agency. The problem is our busted definition of it. Real player agency isn't about having infinite consequence-free choices. It's about making meaningful choices that actually change the world around them. It's that feeling that your decisions matter and that your victories and defeats are earned. Now let's discuss the term we've been overlooking: GM agency. GM agency is your right as a game master to make meaningful decisions that shape the game world, the story, and the experience at the table. It's your power to guide the narrative, to play your NPCs honestly, and to make rulings that serve the game. For way too long, we've been told these two things are enemies, that for players to have more agency, the GM must have less. And that's a lie. A tabletop role-playing game is a collaborative story. It's not the player's story. It's not the GM's story. It's a story you discover together, where player choices meet the world you present. Protecting your agency as a GM has nothing to do with railroading. Railroading is when you cancel out player choice. Protecting your agency is about ensuring you can be an active, excited, and creative participant in your own game. A GM who is fired up and creatively fulfilled will always bring a more dynamic and engaging world for their players. So how do we do this exactly? It all starts before a single die hits the table in what we commonly call Session 0. It's where you build the social contract for your game. It is the single best tool you have for getting everyone on the same page and protecting everyone's agency, yours included. During your session 0, you have to be honest about what you want out of the campaign. Share the ideas and themes that have excited you. If you've built a gritty political intrigue game, just say it. Hey guys, for this campaign, I've prepped a story about rival factions, spying, and tough moral choices. The core fun is going to be navigating this messy web of alliances. Is everyone cool with that kind of game? This one simple conversation does two critical things. First, it gets player buy-in from day one. If they say yes, they are knowingly and willingly signing up for the premise you've created. Second, it gives you permission to have fun. You are allowed to be excited about your ideas. When you share that excitement, you invite the players to share your enthusiasm. This is also where you talk about the campaign's shape. Is it a wide open sandbox, a string of connected adventures, a more focused linear story? There's no wrong way to play, but being clear about it prevents a world of frustration later. You are making a deal. You promise to provide a rich world and an incredible story, and the players promise to actually engage with it. It's a contract, and it's built on respect for everyone's time and creativity. So, let's talk about the moment-to-moment game. One of the most misunderstood pieces of GM advice is say yes or, which is often shortened to just say yes. And while it comes from a good place, in a TTRPG, it's a recipe for burnout if you don't use it carefully. You are under no obligation to say yes if a player's idea torches the game's tone, ignores the world you've built, or completely derails the campaign everyone agreed to in session 0. This is where you use most powerful tool of GM agency. The no but. No isn't a bad word, it's a boundary. The magic part is the but.
Wow, that's a pretty big but.
It tells the players that you see their creativity and you want to work with it. Let's go back to our bakery. The players want to ignore the whole Save the Kingdom thing to sell sourdough. A no but could sound like this. No, you don't find any storefronts for rent, but while you're asking around, you overhear the royal baker panicking because his flour shipments have been cut off by some bandits. He's telling anyone who will listen that if someone could secure his supply line, he'd owe them big time, maybe even a piece of the business. You see what happened? You gently guided them back toward the adventure without shutting them down. You took their idea and wove it into the narrative. That is you using your agency to protect the story structure while still rewarding the player's input. And to be clear, sometimes this will be hard. It is not always easy to figure out a way to weave their suggestions into the story. But as you practice, you'll get better at it, and it'll be more fun for everyone involved. Now, this way of thinking is critical when you're running a published module. A module is not scripture, it's a toolbox. You have the agency to change it. If the book says an NPC will never cooperate, but your players make an amazing point, you can decide they are convinced. If an encounter seems boring or makes no sense to the story, you can change it, or just throw it out. When you treat the adventure like a framework instead of a script, you become a better, more responsive game master. Now, this might sound counterintuitive, but it's the most important point of all. When a GM actively protects their agency, they create a better game for the players and actually boost player agency. Think about it. A bored, disengaged, and burnt-out GM who feels like a glorified chatbot creates a lifeless world. Their NPCs are flat, their descriptions are dull, and their rulings feel random. When a GM is just going through the motions, the world feels like cardboard. And in a world like that, player choices don't feel like they matter because they aren't affecting anything real. Now contrast that with a GM who is passionate and creatively invested, one who is running a world they genuinely care about. Their NPCs have soul because the GM is excited to play them. The story stakes feel genuine because the GM is genuinely invested in what happens next. When players make a choice in that world, it has weight. Their actions get honest reactions from a living, breathing world guided by a creative mind, not just a rulebook. Their agency means more because it's impacting a world that feels alive. This isn't a power struggle. The goal is mutual respect, where everyone at the table knows they are co-authors of a shared story. Player agency lets the characters be the heroes who drive the plot. GM agency makes sure that there's a compelling, coherent, and exciting plot to drive in the first place. In our rush to celebrate the player, we've accidentally built a culture that can make the GM feel more like a waiter than a creator. However, the Game Master is the foundation upon which the entire game is built. And if that foundation starts to crack from the burnout and creative fatigue, the whole house comes crashing down. So let's change the conversation. GM agency isn't about control, it's about collaboration. It's about ensuring that the person who puts in the most work behind the screen also gets to have fun. Please share your thoughts on finding this balance in the comments below. And if this was helpful, please consider liking and subscribing for more TTRPG discussions. Until next time, stay savage.